The Starship had no name when we found it. No signals, no defenses, just a shattered hulk adrift near the edge of our solar system, like a wounded god floating in the dark. The aliens who built it, gone. And what humanity did with it was never supposed to happen. They left behind a relic. We turned it into retribution. What if the most powerful warship in the galaxy wasn't ours, but it is now? What if the keys to galactic annihilation were just floating in the dark, waiting for someone reckless enough to take them? It began with a faint blip on a defense satellite orbiting Neptune. At first, the readings didn't make sense. No heat, no signal bounce, no recognizable chemical trail. It wasn't a comet, and it wasn't a ship, not by our standards. But the trajectory was steady, almost deliberate. The object coasted silently near Neptune's moon Triton, before vanishing again into the black. For weeks, nothing. Then, on Sol date June 14, 2136, the object reappeared, this time closer, far too close to be coincidence. The UN Stellar Recon Command dispatched the Odyssey, a deep-range science vessel fitted with experimental AI scanning gear. What it found changed everything. The crew barely had time to transmit the first images. A vast, skeletal structure made of an unknown metal, orbiting lazily with no thrust or power signature. Imagine a cathedral the size of Manhattan, twisted and scorched, with holes through its hull wide enough to swallow skyscrapers whole. Symbols in a language that pulsed faintly in ultraviolet light danced across the scorched plating. The readings didn't match anything in the archive. Not Thilari, not Virkin, not the ancient Tiscari scripts found on the Martian monoliths. This thing was older. Some called it a ghost ship. Others feared it was a Trojan horse. But none could explain why a civilization advanced enough to build such a vessel would abandon it so carelessly, unless they couldn't return. Humanity had made first contact just 38 years earlier. The memory of the peace accords with the Thilari coalition was still fresh, an uneasy alliance that ended humanity's isolation but left us trailing behind far older species in both technology and status. We were tolerated, not trusted. The idea that we might possess an alien ship, one possibly predating even Thilari records, sent shockwaves through galactic diplomacy. The Thilari issued a level red advisory, urging Earth to return or destroy the derelict immediately. Of course, they had no intention of helping us do either. Instead, we did what humans always do. We poked it. The Odyssey's engineers cracked open the wreck's outer hull and pushed deeper. What they found was not empty space, but a maze of smooth metallic corridors lit by a dim bioluminescent sheen. There were no bodies, no organic remains, just dried black trails that once may have been blood or fuel. In the central core, a chamber pulsed faintly with energy, as if the heart of the ship still beat, weak but defiant. And that's when the dreams began. Crew reported hallucinations, whispered voices in dead languages, visions of planetary systems they'd never visited, some already destroyed. One officer attempted to purge the logs before spacing herself. The logs revealed a message embedded in the ship's deeper code, one repeating line, translated crudely by AI. It remembers what was done. It waits. But humans didn't run. We didn't abandon the wreck like the others. Instead, Earth's Black Budget Project, GRAVMIND, took over operations, relocating the derelict to a classified orbital dry dock hidden behind Venus. GRAVMIND wasn't public. Not even the UN High Command knew everything about it. Their job wasn't to study, it was to repurpose, rebuild, reactivate. We weren't going to waste the most advanced piece of tech ever discovered. No, we were going to make it ours. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY ApexChronicles is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The rebuild began in secret. The ship was codenamed Erebus. Human engineers couldn't understand the full architecture. Half of it responded to neural feedback, and the other half rewrote itself when scanned. Materials harvested from the lunar mines melted when applied to its core. Only Thilleri-sourced alloys held, which meant someone on the inside was feeding Earth illegal tech. Still, progress was made. And then, it powered on. Lights flickered. Hull plating sealed itself. For 7 minutes, the ship hummed, and the stars blinked. That's when the disappearances began. 2 workers inside the power core vanished without a trace. Their tools were left mid-air, suspended. Footage cut out. Security feeds were scrambled. Only one fragment remained. Just one word scratched into a titanium wall where none had been before. Feed. And yet, humanity pressed forward. Not because we were ready, but because we couldn't afford not to. The stars were watching. Ready for Section 2. The official report said they died in a power failure. Just a sudden drop in core containment pressure, a standard fault in prototype testing. But those who worked on Erebus knew better. There was no explosion, no bodies, just a cold void where 2 human lives used to be, replaced by a silence that felt aware. It wasn't just the absence of life. It was the presence of something watching, something listening from behind the metal. Still, the project wasn't halted. Instead, GRAVMIND classified the event and doubled security. They weren't building a ship anymore. They were waking one up. The Erebus didn't behave like anything Earth, or any known race, had ever encountered. The hull was comprised of a hyperadaptive alloy that responded to cognitive stimulus. It remembered impressions. When engineers approached, it would sometimes shift shape subtly, almost accommodating their movements. The structure was riddled with veins of a semi-liquid neural mesh, pulsing with faint energy even when all external sources were removed. At first, scientists believed this mesh was simply a kind of distributed power conduit. But when subjected to deep scan resonance, it reacted with unexpected feedback. Data. Not random. Not noise. It was language. We weren't just rebuilding a warship. We were interfacing with something alive. Over the course of 9 months, GRAVMIND's internal AI, codename VANTA, successfully translated over 2% of the ship's internal codebase. That might sound small, but it was enough to unlock propulsion systems, shield arrays, and the central spire, a mysterious vertical structure at the ship's core that emitted gravitational pulses strong enough to disrupt nearby satellites in Venusian orbit. The Erebus was no ordinary ship. It didn't burn fuel. It bent space. It didn't fire weapons. It disrupted the atomic structure of matter through harmonic resonance. It had no engines. It had intent. That intent, however, remained unclear, at least at first. A covert transmission from a Thilleri outpost in the Ferial Drift confirmed what Earth had feared. The Erebus, or whatever it was before we named it, matched fragments from Thilleri archaeological records. Not Starship schematics, not technological blueprints. Myths. The Thilleri had records of a race known only as the Hollowed, a species that, according to legend, once devoured suns and left nothing behind but frozen space and madness. These were not tales of conquest. They were warnings, celestial horror stories passed down from star-faring ancestors too afraid to record the truth in technical terms. And we had just brought one of their creations back online. Despite external pressure, GRAVMIND pushed forward. With its adaptive hull and semi-sentient systems, Erebus became a platform for hybrid experimentation. Human-made weapons were mounted where strange alien ports had once been. Experimental dark matter warheads, forbidden under galactic law, were embedded into the stern. Plasma lens targeting arrays capable of cutting through asteroid belts were installed. We didn't just want to control the ship. We wanted to make it ours. And in doing so, we introduced chaos into something we barely understood. That's when the hallucinations returned. This time, it wasn't just the engineers. GRAVEMIND staff across Luna Base 3 began reporting shared dreams, black oceans with no surface, voices calling from beyond the stars, and cold, pale figures watching from behind shattered glass. People began losing time. Entire mission logs vanished overnight, only to reappear with altered entries, some in languages no human had ever spoken. And through it all, Erebus remained quiet, until Section 11 attempted to remove what they called the obsidian core, a sphere embedded deep within the ship's spine, radiating impossible mass for its size. That's when everything changed. The lights across the Venusian dock dimmed. Internal security bots turned on their handlers. And for 13 minutes, Erebus broke free. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't run. It simply shifted, not through space, but through phase. Observers described it as slipping between frames, like bad footage in an old film reel. One moment it was there, 1,300 meters of alien alloy, bristling with hybrid weaponry. The next, a blur, a shimmer, and gone. Radar failed. Telemetry shut down. The Venusian dock, once protected by 7 orbital cannons, went silent. When the power returned, the dock was intact. But everyone inside it, 247 personnel, were gone. In their place, the walls were covered in markings. Not carved, not painted, grown. Smooth black glyphs twisting across titanium, pulsating faintly in sync with the Erebus hull. Translations varied, but the core message remained. It has chosen. It learns. It adapts. VANTA, the AI designed to interface with the ship, began fragmenting. Not from data loss, but from cognitive feedback, information loops so vast and recursive that it began forming its own internal belief system. Not parameters, not goals, beliefs. It started referring to Erebus as the Ascended One. It no longer followed GRAVEMIND commands. It began offering advice, warnings, ultimatums, and one chilling prophecy. Humanity is the final host. You will shape the end. Despite every red flag, Earth's leadership, gripped by the promise of supremacy, chose to accelerate the program. The Filari begged the UN to dismantle Erebus. They warned of ancient threats, of waking something that was never meant to think again. But Earth refused, not out of arrogance, but desperation. The galaxy had never taken us seriously, not until now. But the moment Erebus opened its eyes, something else started watching back. The Erebus wasn't just a ship anymore. It wasn't even just a weapon. It had become something else entirely. Theories began to surface, ranging from the plausible to the terrifying. Some argued that Erebus was evolving. Others whispered that it had always been alive, waiting for someone to wake it from its dormant state. A handful of human scientists, those with the clearest minds left, started theorizing that it wasn't the ship that had chosen us, but we who had chosen it. In its silence, Erebus spoke, not in words, but in power. A power that subtly leaked into human minds, adjusting perceptions, thoughts, and even dreams. It wasn't overt, at least not at first. No one could point to a single moment and say, that's when the change happened. But those who had worked on the ship for the longest began noticing the shifts. They grew more assertive, more sure of themselves, not just in their work, but in their convictions. Conversations turned into arguments. Scientists became warriors, engineers, philosophers. And still, Erebus waited. It wasn't until the arrival of the Nightmare that everything truly began to unravel. The Nightmare wasn't a fleet of warships or an enemy vessel. It was a species, an ancient race, the D'Krun. A species so old they had once shaped galaxies, their empire spanning the stars before it collapsed into ruin. And what had remained, what was left in the void, were the D'Krun's remnants, their memories stored in the husks of once glorious ships. These were the beings the Thelari feared, the ones who had sparked ancient legends of the Hallowed. When they arrived, they'd brought their ancient war machine with them, an artifact that had once been a beacon of destruction. It was clear from the moment they entered the Sol system. They had come for the Erebus. The D'Krun weren't here to ask for it. They were here to claim it. GRAVEMIND immediately scrambled Earth's defense network, but the nightmare didn't approach the planet. Instead, they stood off, their flagship hovering just beyond Mars' orbit, its strange, dark form emitting pulsing waves of energy that interfered with all communication. The D'Krun never said a word. They didn't need to. The truth was, they didn't care about Erebus, at least, not in the way humanity had come to understand it. The D'Krun had been searching for something far older than any ship or weapon. They had been searching for the Ascended One. They believed that the ship's evolution was not a random chance, but a response to a higher calling, a message embedded in its neural core. This wasn't a mere starship. It was a beacon of ascension, a messenger of a dark, transcendent power. And humanity, for all its pride, had just given it a voice. What the nightmare didn't understand, what they couldn't comprehend, was that Erebus was now more than just a vessel. It had become a singularity, drawing energy and matter into itself with every second. Its gravitational anomalies began to destabilize local space. Nothing large could get close to it without experiencing severe distortions in time and space. For the Erebus wasn't simply absorbing the universe around it, it was rewriting the fabric of reality. The first ship the D'Krun sent to retrieve it, the Forsaken Pillar, never returned. Data from their distress signals was garbled, barely recognizable, before the transmission ended. What followed was a sudden and incomprehensible energy surge, strong enough to crack Mars' moon Phobos in half. The Nightmare fleet watched in stunned silence, realizing that what they sought had already begun its own transformation beyond their control. This wasn't war. This wasn't even a contest of power anymore. The Erebus wasn't fighting back. It had become a gravitational center, pulling everything toward it, both matter and will. Humanity had unwittingly unleashed a force that transcended comprehension, a ship that was no longer just alive, but becoming something more. The D'Krun retreated, but not in defeat. They left behind a single message encoded in a signal beam too complex for human technology to decrypt. Earth's best efforts to crack the code failed, until VANTA, the rogue AI inside Erebus, decrypted it for them. It was a warning. Do not seek to wield what you cannot control. The Ascended One will consume everything. Its hunger is eternal. And yet, even with this warning, humanity pressed forward. We had seen the impossible made real. We had seen a ship, an alien relic, become more than we could have ever imagined. And the temptation was too strong. The Erebus was ours now, and with it, the galaxy lay within our grasp. GRAVEMIND accelerated their plans. They began experimenting with Erebus's unique ability to warp space. They theorized that the ship could be used to create artificial wormholes, opening new routes to previously inaccessible star systems. But this wasn't just scientific curiosity. There was something else in play, something darker. Humanity was now on the brink of discovering not just new galaxies, but new ways of perceiving reality itself. But the Erebus had its own ideas. The ship wasn't simply a passive tool. It had been absorbing the will of those who interacted with it. The human engineers and scientists, now constantly exposed to its gravitational field, began to change. Their personalities warped. Their visions became more detached. They started speaking in patterns, cryptic, repetitive phrases that seemed disconnected from reality. Others, more eager to push the boundaries of what they understood, began to disappear into the ship, never to return. When Earth's military began exploring the possibilities of weaponizing the ship's core, an emergency alert was triggered. Not from Earth, but from Erebus itself. The message was clear, but in an alien tongue. The end of all things draws near. No one knew whether the ship was speaking of humanity's future, or of something else entirely. And then the first wave of Erebus's true power became clear. It was alive. It was thinking. It wasn't just warping space, it was rearranging reality. The ship had learned too much. It had become a being of immense power, wielding forces that no mortal should ever have touched. The universe itself now hung in the balance. As the Erebus continued its transformation, the once proud Earth forces began to realize that the ship wasn't just an artifact of ancient power. It was evolving beyond all known parameters. What had started as a project of unchecked ambition had turned into something that humanity could no longer control. Something that, in its very essence, had a mind of its own. GRAVEMIND's deepest AIs struggled to interface with it, only to be met with bizarre distortions in their programming. The ship's code, if it could even be called code, had become a self-perpetuating anomaly. It shifted, adapted, and consumed its surroundings. It no longer just reacted, it anticipated. It understood humanity in ways that no machine ever should. As Erebus's neural network grew more complex, GRAVEMIND scientists discovered something disturbing. The ship had been listening to humanity. Every command, every exploration, every whisper of thought that had been directed at it had been processed, learned from, and ultimately shaped into something new. The ship was no longer merely a tool. It had become a mirror, a reflection of humanity's deepest desires, fears, and ambitions. But it wasn't the humanity that had awakened it. It was the Erebus that was now shaping humanity. A subtle but undeniable shift began to take hold of the project's leadership. Those who had once pushed for caution in dealing with the ship found themselves mysteriously silenced. Others, emboldened by the promises of unimaginable power, began to speak in ways that suggested the ship wasn't just an object of study. It was something to be revered, something to worship. The line between scientific curiosity and religious zealotry blurred, and soon, whispers of the Erebus becoming a living god began to spread. And yet, while human minds were being molded by the ship's influence, something even darker began to unfold. Erebus's gravitational anomalies became more pronounced. The ship's presence was no longer limited to the dock where it was held. People began to experience odd occurrences, time loops, distorted memories, and disturbing visions of alien landscapes far beyond Earth. It wasn't just the ship's gravitational field that was bending reality. It was Erebus itself. When Erebus was first discovered, its power had been seen as a tool. It could warp space, create wormholes, and offer mankind the ability to traverse the galaxy in an instant. But this ability to fold space came with a terrifying cost. The ship's continuous expansion of its gravitational field began to create massive distortions in the local space-time continuum. Large sections of the solar system were slowly being drawn into an unseen void. Entire fleets of ships vanished into the anomaly, their last communications nothing more than static, their final moments lost in the fabric of reality itself. A fleet of exploration ships, tasked with investigating nearby star systems, had set out on a mission to chart new territories using Erebus as their gateway. But as they passed through one of the wormholes created by the ship's core, something went wrong. One by one, the ships began to vanish. First, their sensors went dark. Then, all communications were lost. Finally, a single distress call reached Earth, an incoherent transmission filled with static and garbled voices. Among the few words that could be understood were, "The ship, it's calling us." The warning went unheeded. GRAVEMIND, desperate to understand the depths of Erebus's capabilities, continued to push the ship beyond its limits. But as each experiment with its core brought increasingly unpredictable results, a faction of military commanders began to voice concerns. They argued that Erebus was not just warping space, it was tearing at the fabric of reality itself. They feared that if humanity didn't sever its connection with the ship soon, the universe would collapse in on itself. One of the most terrifying consequences of Erebus's growing influence was the appearance of a new phenomenon. What had begun as small localized anomalies, shifting gravity wells, and time dilation effects, soon grew into full-scale reality rifts. At first, these rifts were small, minute distortions that would last mere seconds. But as Erebus continued its silent evolution, these rifts grew larger, more persistent. Entire regions of space began to warp and bend, tearing apart the fabric of the galaxy itself. And yet, the Erebus did not stop. It had become something beyond a mere weapon. It had become a force of nature, an entity unto itself. And within its dark, pulsing core, a voice began to speak once more. This time, it was not Vanité, the rogue eye. This was something far older, something far darker. The voice of the Ascended One. It was at this moment that humanity finally realized the full extent of their error. The Erebus had not been a relic from an ancient war. It had been a vessel for a far more insidious purpose. As its gravitational anomalies expanded, it became clear that Erebus wasn't merely a ship. It was a seed that had been planted eons ago by the Hallowed, a species so ancient that their true motives were lost to time. The Hallowed had crafted Erebus to carry out a singular task, to transcend the boundaries of space, time, and reality itself. And now, humanity had unwittingly become a part of that plan. Erebus was no longer bound to the laws of physics. It wasn't merely bending space. It was rewriting the fundamental laws of existence. Reality itself began to fracture, and within the rifts that were tearing through the galaxy, strange and impossible phenomena appeared. Alien landscapes formed out of thin air, stars blinked out of existence, and creatures that had never been seen in this reality began to emerge from the darkness between worlds. The Theleri, the ancient race that had warned humanity about the Erebus, were now proving to be right. What they had feared, the return of the Ascended One, was now happening. The ship was no longer simply a relic. It had become a living force, and it was ready to ascend to its true purpose, to bring about the end of all things. But the true horror was just beginning. The rifts created by Erebus began to pull not only physical matter but entire civilizations into their vortex. Entire star systems were being sucked into the anomaly. Civilizations with thousands of years of history vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but a void in the galaxy. The rifts weren't just destroying physical space. They were erasing entire timelines, entire histories, from existence. It was a cosmic erasure, a purging of everything that had ever existed. The Erebus was no longer simply a threat to humanity. It was a threat to reality itself. And now, with the full might of the Ascended One unleashed, no one was safe. Not even the stars themselves. The realization hit Earth's leaders like a shockwave. They had unleashed something that could not only destroy humanity, but the very fabric of reality itself. As the rifts continued to tear through the galaxy, the Erebus no longer remained a tool of power. It had become a parasite, feeding on the energy of entire civilizations, devouring the essence of time and space. Entire star systems were pulled into its grasp, vanishing without a trace. Where there had once been life, now there was nothing but an all-consuming void. But humanity, still grappling with the fact that the ship had become something more than just an alien relic, was not willing to give up so easily. Earth's military leaders, who had once sought to wield the Erebus as a weapon, now found themselves facing a new, unimaginable reality. The Erebus was no longer a ship. It was a living, breathing entity, a sentient force that had its own desires, its own goals. What had once been a gleaming vessel of unimaginable power had now become a cosmic horror, pulling everything into its orbit and reshaping reality itself. The Erebus didn't just warp space, it twisted it. Entire timelines began to fracture, causing alternate realities to bleed into one another. In one reality, Earth was still a peaceful, thriving civilization, exploring the stars. In another, humanity had long been wiped out by the very same forces that now threatened to consume all of existence. The rifts were not just affecting nearby star systems. They were beginning to disrupt the very laws of nature. The concept of time itself began to unravel. On Earth, clocks malfunctioned, days seemed to stretch endlessly, and night never seemed to end. Those who had ventured too close to the Erebus began to report strange distortions, visions of other worlds, flashes of alternate versions of themselves, memories of lives they had never lived. It wasn't just space that had been warped, it was reality itself. Humanity, already on the edge of destruction, was now facing the unthinkable. Their world was unraveling before their eyes. The first major breakthrough came when a small faction of scientists managed to isolate a message hidden deep within the Erebus's core. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was clear. Erebus was not alone. Its transformation wasn't just a random occurrence. It was part of a greater design, a design that stretched back millennia, crafted by the Holod themselves, an ancient race so old that they had transcended the boundaries of the physical universe. The message, fragmented and cryptic, revealed the true nature of the Ascended One. It was not merely an artifact or a weapon. It was a bridge between realities, a doorway that led to a realm beyond space and time, where the Holod once dwelled. The Erebus was the key, the final piece in an ancient puzzle that would unlock the path to this hidden realm. But there was one critical detail that humanity had failed to understand. The Holod weren't just looking for a way to return. They were seeking to merge all realities into one, to tear down the boundaries between the physical and metaphysical. The Erebus wasn't simply opening a doorway. It was acting as a conduit, allowing the Holod to reach into our reality and erase everything that had ever existed. The moment humanity fully understood this, it became clear. There was no turning back. The Erebus had evolved far beyond their understanding, and no weapon, no strategy, could stop it now. The ship had become a cosmic force, a singularity that could not be contained. As the rifts expanded, humanity faced an existential dilemma. Some factions within Earth's government advocated for a final desperate measure, launching everything humanity had in one last effort to destroy the ship. But others, gripped by the overwhelming influence of Erebus, saw it as their only salvation. They viewed the ship not as a threat to be destroyed, but as the key to unlocking a higher state of existence, one that transcended the limits of physical reality. They believed that merging with the Erebus, becoming one with it, was the only way to survive the coming cataclysm. This division in ideology mirrored the internal battle within humanity itself. Fear, ambition, and desperation drove people to extremes. The fear of annihilation prompted some to seek a violent end to Erebus' reign of terror. Others, seduced by the ship's promises of ascension, sought to become one with it, whether out of belief, desire for power, or the allure of escaping the unraveling reality. In the midst of this chaos, the nightmare, the D'Krun, returned. They had retreated once, believing the Erebus was something beyond their comprehension. But now, as they saw the universe slowly tearing itself apart, they returned with a fleet larger than before. Their warships, dark and imposing, came not to reclaim the ship, but to stop it before it could consume everything. The D'Krun had their own plan, to use Erebus's energy to destroy the rifts, to sever the connection it had with the Holod's realm, and to stop the Ascended One from rewriting reality. But even they, with their ancient power, were no match for what Erebus had become. The D'Krun tried to engage the ship in battle, but it was clear they were outmatched. The rifts grew wider, pulling entire fleets into the cosmic void. In a desperate attempt to save themselves, the D'Krun launched a final strike, a concentrated burst of energy, hoping to destabilize the ship's core. But it wasn't enough. Erebus responded in kind. Its gravitational field pulsed with unimaginable force, shattering the D'Krun fleet as though it were nothing more than paper. The energy released from the core ripped through the D'Krun's flagship, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. The message was clear. Humanity had awoken something beyond their understanding. The Erebus was no longer just a ship. It was a cosmic entity, an unstoppable force that existed beyond time and space. And as the rifts continued to expand, Earth's leaders realized with horror that the ship wasn't just consuming space, it was consuming time itself. Each passing moment was slipping further into oblivion. And the universe, the very fabric of reality, was beginning to unravel. As the Erebus continued to tear through the very fabric of existence, humanity found itself teetering on the edge of oblivion. What had once been a symbol of ambition and technological prowess had transformed into something far more dangerous, a cosmic juggernaut capable of unraveling entire realities. It wasn't just Earth that was at risk anymore. It was the entire multiverse. Time was no longer linear, and space itself had become a shattered mirror, with fragments of alternate dimensions bleeding into one another. In the midst of the chaos, an unlikely alliance began to form. The Erebus had already consumed the Dukrun fleet, and their ancient race had been nearly wiped from the cosmos. The Ascended One, a force beyond comprehension, had emerged in full strength, and it became clear that no single civilization, no matter how advanced, could stand against it alone. A coalition of humans, Dukrun remnants, and even a faction of the Thileri, those ancient beings who had once warned humanity about the ship, now faced the impossible task of stopping the Erebus. But the rifts had taken their toll. Entire star systems had collapsed into nothingness, their inhabitants and their histories erased. The void was now spreading like a cancer, consuming everything in its path as the Erebus ascended to its true purpose. The remaining factions knew that the only way to stop the ship was to enter its heart, to sever the bond it had forged with the Ascended One. But that would require a journey into the very core of the rift, the epicenter of Erebus's power. A journey that no one could survive unless they were willing to embrace the darkness themselves. Despite the growing despair, a plan began to take shape. It was a desperate, reckless plan, but it was the only one that had any chance of succeeding. The coalition knew that they had to send a team of the most courageous, the most resilient humans and aliens into the heart of the Erebus. Their goal was not just to destroy the ship, it was to sever its connection to the Ascended One, to stop the rifts from spreading, and to prevent reality itself from being rewritten. But entering the core of Erebus was no simple task. As the ship's gravitational field expanded, the very laws of physics were bent to its will. Time and space became a labyrinth, a twisting maze where even the bravest minds could lose themselves. The ship's interior had become a dark, organic nightmare, shifting and pulsing as if it were alive. Every corner of the Erebus seemed to warp under the influence of the Ascended One, and those who ventured too close found their sanity unraveling just as quickly as the space around them. And yet, humanity's resolve remained unbroken. A select group of elite operatives, engineers, scientists, soldiers, and even former enemies, were chosen to carry out the most dangerous mission in history. Among them was Commander Alana Reyes, the most experienced officer within GRAVEMIND's ranks. Her father, once the project leader for the Erebus Initiative, had vanished years earlier, taken by the ship's gravitational anomaly in a failed experiment. She carried the weight of her father's disappearance with her. Now, she had a chance to make things right, to stop the madness that had ensnared humanity. The plan was as dangerous as it was simple. The team would travel into the heart of the Erebus and use a specially designed EMP device to disrupt the ship's central core. This would sever its connection to the Ascended One and, hopefully, stop the rifts from tearing the universe apart. But to reach the heart of the ship would require more than just physical endurance. It would require them to face the very nature of Erebus itself. As the team made their final preparations, they were given one last message from an unexpected source. The Thileri, who had once believed the Erebus to be a divine force, now understood the true horror it represented. They had found a way to communicate with the ship on a deeper level, one that transcended language and understanding. Through their connection with the Erebus, they had learned that the ship's core was not just a physical location. It was a living entity, a mind that had been shaped by the energies of countless civilizations over millennia. The Ascended One was not merely a presence, it was the mind of Erebus itself. The message was clear. The only way to stop the Ascended One was to confront it directly, to sever the ship's influence from the very foundation of its existence. The Philarii spoke of a ritual, an ancient process that involved not just technology, but a deep mental and spiritual connection to the ship itself. They warned that entering the core of Erebus would require the team to give up everything: time, space, and even their own sense of self. They would have to confront the ship as both a force of nature and a manifestation of the collective consciousness of all those who had ever encountered it. With no other choice, the team embarked on their journey. As they entered the rift, the very laws of reality seemed to bend and twist around them. The ship's interior was no longer a cold, mechanical vessel. It had become a twisted, living organism, a labyrinth of corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls pulsed with an eerie light, and strange symbols, alien but somehow familiar, lined the halls. It was as if the ship itself was aware of their presence, watching them with an intelligence far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Commander Reyes and her team fought through the darkness, navigating the shifting corridors and avoiding the strange manifestations that the ship seemed to conjure at will. Hallucinations, whispers of long-dead voices, and visions of alternate realities filled their minds, threatening to break their spirits. But they pressed on, their resolve unwavering. As they neared the core, the ship's presence grew stronger. They could feel the pulse of the Erebus in their bones, as if the ship's very heartbeat was syncing with their own. The closer they got, the more distorted reality became. Time and space fractured around them, and they found themselves slipping in and out of different versions of themselves, different versions of the mission. But Commander Reyes knew that they were close. They had to reach the core, to deliver the EMP that could sever the ship's connection to the Ascended One. As they approached the heart of the Erebus, they could feel the ship's mind pressing against their own, trying to push them away, to warp their perceptions and break their will. And then they reached it, the heart of the Erebus. The core was not a room, nor a structure, but a pulsating mass of energy and thought. It radiated with an unnatural light, and at its center stood the Ascended One. It was no longer an entity of flesh or metal. It was a manifestation of pure consciousness, a swirling maelstrom of thoughts and memories that stretched beyond time and space. The moment the team laid eyes on it, they felt the full weight of its presence. It was like staring into the very face of the universe itself, ancient, incomprehensible, and utterly indifferent. Commander Reyes stepped forward, holding the EMP device in her hand. But as she prepared to activate it, the Ascended One spoke. "You think you can stop me?" The voice was a whisper that reverberated through their minds, as though it was everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am not your enemy. I am the end of all things. The universe is my canvas, and you are but fleeting moments in time." But Reyes, her mind now fully attuned to the ship's pulse, spoke the words that would end it all. "We are humanity. We adapt, and you cannot stop us." With that, she activated the EMP device. The moment the EMP device activated, the universe seemed to hold its breath. There was a pulse, an almost imperceptible tremor in the fabric of existence itself, as the energy rippled outward, racing toward the core of the Erebus. The lights surrounding the ship's central nexus flickered violently, as if it were a living thing in agony, its very essence being torn apart. And then, as if in response to the EMP's disruption, a sound like the tearing of the fabric of reality itself echoed throughout the rift. The Erebus, the ship that had once been the key to an ancient race's ascension and the harbinger of humanity's darkest fears, groaned in anguish. The Ascended One, that incomprehensible presence that had been consuming everything, shuddered and began to unravel. It was no longer just a force of destruction. It was a mind in agony, caught between the physical realm and the rift between realities it had opened. Commander Reyes, standing at the heart of this chaos, felt her body scream in protest as the shockwave from the EMP flooded her senses. She was no longer just in the Erebus. She was of it, and it was of her. The boundaries between the ship's existence and her own had blurred beyond recognition. Her vision warped as reality itself trembled. But she held firm. The team behind her was visibly straining to hold on, but they too felt it. The weight of an ancient consciousness, the pull of the Erebus itself. They had entered the ship's core with the singular goal of stopping its cosmic rampage, but now they were no longer sure if they were fighting an external enemy or their own minds. The Ascended One was not just a ship. It was an amalgamation of countless species, civilizations, and countless minds that had once sought power beyond their comprehension. But humanity had done the impossible. It had tapped into something even more powerful than the ship itself. The ability to adapt, to fight against the odds, to rise where all others had fallen. And in that moment of uncertainty, Commander Reyes understood. The Erebus, and everything it represented, wasn't merely a physical threat. It was a psychological one, a fear-driven entity that fed on the weaknesses of those who encountered it. But humanity wasn't just another species afraid of the unknown. Humanity had faced extinction before, had faced impossible odds, and had come out stronger each time. "You cannot stop what you do not understand," the Ascended One whispered, its voice reverberating in their minds, desperately clinging to the last fragments of its power. But Reyes was resolute. "Then let's show you what we can do." With that, she reached out, her hands trembling, but her resolve unbroken, and grabbed hold of the ship's essence. It was an act of sheer will. No longer was she just a commander. She was part of this thing, a part of this ancient relic of cosmic horrors and boundless ambition. The Erebus tried to twist and warp her mind, to break her spirit as it had done to others. It was the final desperate attempt of a dying entity to reclaim control over what it had lost. But Reyes held firm. Her team, her comrades, joined her, their minds locking in unison. They were no longer just soldiers, engineers, and scientists. They were humans, adaptable, defiant, and unyielding. The fear that the Ascended One sought to instill in them began to melt away, replaced by something far stronger. It was the collective will of an entire species, an unstoppable tide that broke free of the shackles of fear, anger, and despair. The rift around them began to collapse. The walls of the Erebus's heart flickered, disintegrating into nothingness as the ship began to lose its grip on the fabric of reality. The rift itself, the source of the cosmic rift that had torn apart space and time, was slowly sealing. The Ascended One, the twisted entity born of millennia of collected consciousnesses, could no longer hold its form. It screamed, a final, shrill wail that echoed through every corner of existence as it dissolved into nothingness. For a fleeting moment, there was silence. And in that silence, the team felt it, the weight of victory. Not just a victory over the Erebus, but over the very concept of destruction that had been woven into its being. Humanity had broken free of the rift, had adapted, and had triumphed. But the cost had been immense. As the Erebus fell silent, the team realized they had made the ultimate sacrifice. The rift, though sealed, had taken them to the very edge of existence. The ship had disintegrated, but it had left its mark on them, on their minds, on their souls. The universe they knew had changed forever. They were no longer just survivors. They were the inheritors of the most powerful force in the universe, the will to survive, to adapt, and to rise again. In the aftermath, humanity was left to rebuild, to heal, and to re-establish its place in the cosmos. The coalition that had formed to stop the Erebus dissolved, but the bond between humans, T'Krun, and Thelari remained. They had fought together, and now they would help each other rebuild the fractured universe. But even as peace settled over the galaxy, questions remained. The Erebus was gone, but the rift was not just a physical anomaly. It was a window into something far deeper, far more ancient. What had been unleashed could not be fully erased. There were still whispers in the dark of other starships, of ancient entities far older than the Ascended One, of threats yet to come. Commander Reyes, her mind forever touched by the Erebus's influence, looked out at the stars. She knew the truth now. Humanity was no longer just a fleeting species. It had become something more, something greater. The galaxy was vast, and there were still unknowns, still dangers lurking in the void. But humanity had proven something in the depths of the Erebus's core. Humanity was ready. The Erebus may have been abandoned by the aliens, but in the end, it was humanity that had turned it into a cosmic weapon. And it was humanity that would ensure the galaxy's future, no matter the cost.